I used to think weddings were meant to be filled with joy, music floating in the air, flowers blooming on every table, and laughter spilling from one corner to the next. But when I stepped into my son's wedding, I felt more like a stranger than a mother. No arms reached out to hug me, no voices called my name. Only the quiet scrape of whispers behind my back, sharp as glass, cutting without leaving a visible wound. I suppose I should be used to it by now. Since the divorce, I've learned how to live on the margins, how to take up as little space as possible at family gatherings, how to disappear into silence. Yet today was supposed to be different. Today was the beginning of my son's new life. And somehow, it was also the stage for every old wound to resurface under the glare of crystal chandeliers. I chose the simplest dress I owned. I knew it wouldn't matter what I wore. To them, I would always be the outsider, the woman they could measure and mock with a single glance. They say a wedding unites two families, but in truth, I stood somewhere in between, one foot in the memory of a marriage long broken, the other slipping further away from the child I once cradled in my arms. And then it happened. A sharp, high-pitched squeal tore through the speakers, silencing the music, silencing the room. That sound, so accidental, so ordinary, made my heart trip in my chest. It felt like a warning, though I couldn't yet explain why. Within minutes, the polite smiles would vanish, the careful facades would crumble, and the truth that had been buried for years would rise, right here in the very place meant to be sacred. I walked into the ballroom in the only dress I could still call special, a navy piece that had hung in my closet for years. The satin was faded at the seams, but it still held together the way I did. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor, and almost immediately, I heard the whispers behind me. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. I have learned over time that whispers can wound more deeply than shouts. The room was glowing with white roses and golden light, a scene meant to celebrate love. Yet the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt as though I had brought a storm with me, an unwelcome chill among the warmth. My eyes found Brianna, radiant in her gown, every inch the perfect bride. She carried herself as though the world was watching, and perhaps it was. Her gaze slid over the crowd, and then it landed on me. For the briefest second, her expression faltered. She leaned toward her bridesmaid, but her words were angled perfectly so they would reach me. "Don't embarrass me," she called me, mother, only when others were listening. Today, even that formality slipped away. I felt the words tighten around my chest like a noose. I swallowed the retort that rose up in my throat, reminding myself that this was Ethan's day, not mine. I forced a smile that hurt my cheeks, the kind of smile you wear when the room has already decided who you are. Then, without warning, the microphone on the stage screeched to life. The shrill feedback sliced through the laughter, through the music, through everything. People winced, hands flying to ears, and the room fell silent in a single breath. For a moment no one moved. The bride froze mid-gesture, the groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, and I stood rooted to the spot, as if the sound itself had pinned me there. It was ridiculous to think anyone blamed me for the noise, but in that instant, I felt the weight of 100 eyes, as though the squeal had burst forth from my own chest. I've grown used to being overlooked, dismissed, even pitied. I've lived in the corners of family photographs, on the edges of conversations. But that sound, the harsh cry of the microphone, felt like a crack in the floor beneath us all. Something had shifted. And for the first time in years, I felt that I was not merely a shadow at the celebration. Today was different. I didn't yet know why, but I knew the air had changed. The whispers had tried to push me small, invisible. Yet here, in this cavernous room filled with silk and champagne, the silence that followed was mine. I carried myself across the glittering floor toward the table marked with Ethan's name. The place cards were lined up neatly, each one in gold ink that curled like vines across thick ivory paper. I searched for mine with fingers that trembled, half afraid it might not exist at all. Families are supposed to sit together at weddings, front and center, united in pride, sharing the best view of the couple. But when I finally found my card, it was tucked at the very end of the table, as if someone had pushed me deliberately toward the shadows. I lowered myself into the chair, careful not to scrape it too loudly against the polished floor. My purse sat heavy on my lap, my hands folded tightly over it like a shield. Around me, the air buzzed with conversation, aunts leaning close with painted lips and pearl earrings, cousins clinking glasses already half, filled with champagne. Bursts of laughter that seemed to grow louder the closer I sat. To a stranger, it might have looked like pure joy, a family celebrating love. To me, it felt like a stage where everyone had been given their roles. Except me. I was the extra who had wandered into the frame, unwanted, unneeded, invisible until I wasn't. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, willing myself to disappear into the backdrop. That was when it happened. A voice, sharp and thoughtless, rose above the hum of chatter. One of the relatives, a man whose face was familiar only in the vague way of holiday gatherings long past, turned toward me and announced, clear enough for the entire table to hear, "Ooh, let her sit here." The words landed like a slap. The laughter died instantly, snuffed out as though someone had blown on a candle. The silence that followed was thicker than the music drifting faintly from the stage. My fork slipped against the edge of the plate, the metallic clink louder than it should have been, drawing even more attention. I kept my eyes fixed on the embroidered flowers of the tablecloth, tracing the vines with my gaze. My throat burned with all the words I wanted to say but knew better than to release. A wedding is supposed to be sacred ground, a place where love overrules every petty cruelty. Instead, I sat there like an intruder who had wandered into a scene written for someone else. I lifted my head, desperate, searching for the one face that could steady me. Ethan stood near the head table, tall in his tuxedo, his arm draped casually around Brianna's waist. He was close enough to have heard the insult. Close enough to sense the way it seared through me. My heart tightened with a fragile kind of hope. All he had to do was meet my eyes. All he had to do was acknowledge me, say something to remind them all that I belonged here. But Ethan didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the far side of the room, as if the words had never been spoken. His lips pressed into a tight line, his jaw rigid. When Brianna whispered something into his ear, he bent his head closer, nodding, his attention locked on her. My shame swelled in the space he left empty. It was almost worse than the insult itself. Not that someone dared question my place at the table, but that my own son pretended he hadn't heard, pretended I wasn't there. The chatter began again, the clinking of glasses resuming as though the moment had been folded neatly away like a napkin. But it didn't vanish from me. It lodged inside my chest, sharp and immovable. A wedding is supposed to be a day of unity, of fresh beginnings. Instead, I felt myself becoming a ghost in my own son's story, a shadow at the edge of his happiness. And as I sat there stiff, backed and silent, I realized with aching clarity, joy has a way of choosing its favorites, and I was not one of them. The master of ceremonies walked across the stage, his smile stretched wide as though it had been practiced in a mirror. With a flourish, he held out the microphone to Brianna. She accepted it like a queen might accept her crown. Chin high, shoulders back, the train of her dress spilling across the floor like a tide no one dared step into. The applause was warm, genuine even, though I could not join in. My palms rested flat against my thighs, as if clapping might betray some silent truth, that I already knew how little space there was for me in her world. She leaned into the mic, her voice bright as bells as she thanked the guests for coming, weaving anecdotes about Ethan and their journey together. The crowd laughed at the right places, their smiles wide, their champagne glasses lifted in celebration. I studied her from the distance of my chair, searching for the girl behind the performance. The one who had once looked at me with a softness I thought might grow into something like respect. But that girl was gone, replaced by the polished bride who now commanded the room. As she turned slightly, the mic still in her hand, she bent toward her maid of honor. I saw the small flick of her thumb on the switch, and then I heard it. Words not meant for anyone else. This mother-in-law is such an embarrassment. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The sentence was plain, but it landed with the precision of a blade. My ears rang, and then the laughter began. Not hers, not the bridesmaids, but the room's. Dozens of chuckles, muffled at first, then swelling, 100 people delighting in my humiliation. The sound rolled over me like thunder. I wanted to vanish, to crawl beneath the white linen tablecloth and disappear into the floor. I could feel the heat in my face, the sting at the back of my eyes. My body betrayed me, stiff and shaking all at once, and I gripped the edge of the table as though it might anchor me against the tide of ridicule. I glanced toward Ethan. My son. My anchor. If anyone could stop this, it was him. If anyone could soften the laughter, it would be his voice. But he stood frozen, his expression caught between shock and denial. His gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. He didn't move toward me, didn't even raise a hand in protest. Instead, he let the sound of his wife's cruelty wash over us both, leaving me alone in its wake. Every syllable she had spoken echoed inside me, sharper each time, as though the room itself wanted to etch the words into my skin. Such an embarrassment. They laughed as if it were a joke, but I heard it as truth, a truth they had all agreed upon long before the microphone betrayed her. And yet, as the laughter subsided and the music swelled again, I sat very still, my heart beating in steady defiance. I had lived through worse storms than this, and I would not collapse under their mockery. The words cut deep, yes, but sometimes wounds have a way of reminding you you're still alive. I stood frozen in my chair, the laughter rippling through the hall like an echo I couldn't escape. It rose and fell in waves, spreading from table to table, and though I knew they weren't all laughing at me, it felt as though they were. My skin prickled under the heat of the chandelier light, and I couldn't force my body to move. My eyes searched desperately across the sea of sequin gowns and pressed tuxedos, looking for one face, one anchor in the storm. My son's. There he was, standing near the stage, his arm comfortably looped around Brianna's shoulders. She leaned into him, her veil brushing against his jacket. Her lips curved in the kind of smile that photographs are built on. Ethan didn't look my way. He didn't even flinch as the laughter swelled again. Didn't reach out to stop it, didn't try to soften the blow. His attention stayed locked on his bride, as if I were nothing more than a shadow on the wall. A sharp pain bloomed in my chest, sharper than the words themselves had been. There was something unbearable in watching him stand there so still, his silence speaking louder than any denial could. He had chosen, and in that moment, it wasn't me. The clinking of glasses started up again, and guests leaned in toward one another, whispering behind polite hands, their smiles sly and knowing. I kept my gaze low, fixing it on the tablecloth, but the colors blurred as my eyes stung. My throat was thick, my heart pounding, my body telling me to flee, though my feet refused to move. Then, out of nowhere, a hand appeared in front of me. It wasn't Ethan's hand. It wasn't anyone from my family. It was the hand of a young waiter, his sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow. His expression gentle but careful, as though he knew the danger of being seen extending kindness where no one else dared. He placed a slender flute of champagne into my trembling fingers. "Don't cry," he whispered, his voice so quiet I almost wondered if I imagined it. I blinked at him, startled not just by the words but by the tenderness threaded through them. A stranger, someone who owed me nothing, had seen me more clearly in that moment than my own flesh and blood. The contrast made my chest ache, but it also steadied me. I tightened my hand around the glass, feeling its coolness seep into my palm. I didn't drink it. I only held it as though it was proof I still existed in this room. Proof that someone had acknowledged me when my son could not. Around me, the laughter was already fading, replaced by the hum of music and chatter, as though nothing had happened. But I would not forget. I could not. It is a strange kind of mercy when the smallest gesture, a quiet voice from someone you don't know, cuts through the cruelty of those who should have loved you most. In that instant, I realized something bitter and undeniable. Sometimes strangers are gentler than your own blood. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat into the microphone, the way men do when they want to press a reset button on the atmosphere. His smile stretched wider than it had moments before, as if it could paste over the awkwardness that still lingered in the air. "Now, let's take a moment," he said brightly, "to hear a few words from the family." His gaze swept across the tables until it landed squarely on me. "Would the mother of the groom please stand?" The words sliced through me. For an instant, I wished he hadn't said them at all. But the crowd had already turned in my direction, their faces eager for another performance. The ladder from earlier hadn't vanished completely. It hovered still, a ghost lingering between us. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my breath shallow. The soles of my shoes betrayed me. They squeaked against the gleaming marble floor, each step announcing itself louder than the last. The sound echoed like a cruel parody of music, reminding everyone that I had not been meant for this spotlight. My shoes were old, worn in places where the leather had thinned. And with every creak they told the truth I had tried to hide, that I didn't belong in this polished world. The room blurred at the edges as I reached for the microphone. My hand trembled so fiercely I had to grip it with both palms. Before I could speak, a high-pitched squeal pierced the air once more. The microphone betrayed me as it had betrayed Brianna. The screech was sharp enough to make guests wince, and laughter flickered again in the corners of the room. Softer this time, but still there, sly and poisonous. I wanted to tell them something honest. Something that would remind them that I was more than their punchline. Words gathered at the edge of my lips, but they collapsed under the weight of their stares. I looked down at the paper napkin crumpled in my hand, its folds tight where I had twisted it during the meal, and suddenly the thought of speaking felt impossible. A murmur rippled through the tables. Some whispered, some smirked, and a few avoided looking at me at all, the way people look away from something uncomfortable on the street. I caught sight of Ethan again, his jaw set, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He didn't reach for me. He didn't rise to soften the edges of my humiliation. He only stood there, arm anchored around his wife, as though distance could absolve him. I swallowed hard, the microphone still trembling in my grip. The words I never spoke lodged in my throat, heavy and unsaid. In the silence that followed, I realized something brutal but undeniable: crowds can be more merciless than any courtroom. Here, judgment came not from a gavel but from smirks and whispers, from the laughter that refused to die. And in that moment, standing under the blinding lights with my shoes squeaking and my heart breaking, I knew this truth: a gathering meant to celebrate love had turned into my trial, and the jury had already reached its verdict. I lowered myself back into the chair, my body still trembling from the humiliation of the microphone's betrayal. My palms were damp, my breath uneven. I wanted nothing more than to vanish into the folds of the tablecloth, to let the music and laughter wash me away. And then, as if fate had decided the night would not let me slip quietly into shadow, I saw him. At the far side of the room, tucked away near a pillar draped in ivory silk, sat a man in a tailored suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't sipping champagne, or laughing at the jokes that flew from table to table. Instead, he sat with a calm, deliberate stillness. On the table in front of him rested a black leather briefcase, its edges worn but polished, and a stack of files neatly arranged as though this were an office, not a wedding. My heart caught in my throat. A lawyer. I recognized the stance. The posture of someone used to waiting for their turn to speak. He didn't belong here any more than I did, and yet he sat with the quiet assurance of a man who knew exactly why he had come. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Perhaps the weight of the evening had finally tipped me into fantasy. But then I saw his fingers tapping the folder in a steady rhythm, a signal to himself, maybe, that his moment was near. When the master of ceremonies tried once more to lift the room with a toast, the man stood. He didn't raise his glass. He didn't smile. Instead, he cleared his throat, the sound low but firm, and asked for the microphone. The shift was immediate. Chairs creaked as people turned, their curiosity like sparks flying through the air. The laughter stilled, the whispers halted. Even Brianna's face lost its practiced poise. She blinked, glancing toward Ethan as if silently demanding an explanation he could not give. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the man said, his voice resonant, controlled. He introduced himself simply, without flourish, but the title attorney seemed to echo louder than any decoration in the hall. He spoke of representation, of matters that had been delayed too long, of instructions that had been left to him. The room stiffened. Every guest leaned closer, pulled by the gravity of his words. A wedding was supposed to be about love and vows and promises for the future. But here, under the glitter of chandeliers and the watchful eyes of 100 guests, something else was about to unfold. Even the bride and groom, Ethan with his straightened shoulders, Brianna with her painted smile cracking at the edges, looked utterly unprepared. Their hands clasped tighter. But the certainty they had flaunted all night seemed to falter under the weight of the lawyer's presence. I clutched the stem of the champagne glass still in my hand, feeling the cool sweat of condensation against my skin. A strange, unexpected calm settled over me. I had spent the evening shrinking under whispers and laughter, but this interruption didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like a beginning, and in that instant, I knew tonight wasn't over. The lawyer adjusted the microphone, his movements steady, almost rehearsed, as if he'd done this hundreds of times before. The room, once buzzing with chatter and laughter, grew quiet. Even the clinking of silverware against porcelain ceased. His voice carried easily, not loud, but commanding in a way that made people lean forward to listen. "My name is Thomas Caldwell," he began. "I am the legal representative of Mr. David Harper." The name struck me like a stone. David, my former husband. The man whose absence had shaped so much of my life after the divorce. The man who had left scars deeper than any courtroom could record. For years, I had spoken his name only in the privacy of my thoughts, and now it rang out in a wedding hall filled with roses and champagne. A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. Some frowned, trying to place the name. Others turned their heads toward me, as though I were the missing puzzle piece in a game they hadn't realized they were playing. I felt the air constrict in my chest. David, what could he possibly have left behind that required unveiling here, on the night of his son's wedding? Caldwell did not falter. He opened the folder he carried, his fingers brushing lightly over the pages. His tone remained even, but every word seemed to strike with precision. "Mr. Harper left behind a last will and testament, revised shortly before his passing. Most of you will be familiar with the earlier provisions, but tonight, as instructed, I am to read aloud the final section." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Chairs shifted, bodies leaned closer. Anticipation prickling through the air like static before a storm. The final section. Even the words themselves carried weight, dangling in the space between us, heavy with promise and dread. I swallowed hard, the champagne glass still trembling in my hand. My thoughts spun. Why here? Why now? The night had already branded me with humiliation, and now, somehow, David's shadow had crossed into the room, threatening to deepen the mark. Ethan's face paled. He released Brianna's hand, his eyes darting to the lawyer with something that looked a lot like fear. Brianna, too, stiffened, her practiced smile faltering for the first time. The guests turned in unison, 100 eyes swinging toward me, as though the mere mention of David's name had lit a spotlight at my chair. The lawyer cleared his throat, reading with crisp precision, while the whispers began at the edges of the room. Soft at first, then gathering like waves. People didn't just hear the words. They reacted to them, murmuring, speculating, pointing with their eyes. I sat very still, feeling their stares land heavy on my shoulders. Every second stretched long, unbearable. As though I had been put on trial again, not for what I had done, but for who I was. In that moment, I understood the wedding was no longer just a celebration. It had become a stage, and a new act was beginning. One written not by Ethan or Brianna, not even by me, but by the man I thought I had left behind. The lawyer flipped open the folder, his hands precise, his posture unshaken even under the weight of so many eyes. The rustle of paper was louder than it should have been in that vast room, every turn of the page pulling the silence tighter. When he began to speak again, his voice carried cleanly through the hall, steady and deliberate, as if he understood that his words were about to rearrange the air we were breathing. "I will now read the final clause of Mr. Harper's will," he said. The words dropped like pebbles into a pond, sending ripples of unease across the wedding hall. Guests leaned in, eager for spectacle. The chandelier above seemed to hum, its crystals trembling faintly as though it, too, was listening. My fingers curled around the base of my glass, cold moisture slicking my skin. A strange buzzing filled my ears, part dread, part anticipation. Regarding the distribution of assets, the lawyer continued, his voice unflinching. "The Lake House property, along with the retirement investment account." He paused, eyes scanning the text to ensure precision. The room held its breath, the tension so thick it felt like we were all balancing on a wire. "Are to be left to." I braced myself for Ethan's name, or perhaps Brianna's, certain it would confirm what I had already suspected, that this night had been designed to diminish me, to remind me of my place on the outskirts. But then, the word landed. My name, spoken into the microphone, amplified through the speakers, echoing through every corner of the ballroom. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The sound of it was so unexpected, so foreign in this setting, that it didn't register as mine. Then I saw the ripple it caused. Faces turning, eyes widening, mouths parting in disbelief. The silence fractured into scattered whispers. Incredulous and sharp, I sat frozen, my body unable to reconcile the humiliation of minutes ago with the startling truth of this revelation. The house by the lake. The place where I had once planted flowers by the porch, where Ethan had learned to swim in summers that felt endless. That house was mine again. And not just the house, but the security of the retirement fund, a future I had not dared to imagine. The weight of the words seemed to knock the breath out of Ethan. His expression faltered, his lips parting as though he wanted to protest, but no sound came. Brianna's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a pinched stillness that cracked at the edges. Then, slowly, it happened, the applause. It started with a few uncertain claps, then spread like a tide. Palms meeting palms, not for the bride, not for the groom, but for me. For the woman they had laughed at, dismissed, pushed to the shadows. The irony was almost too much to bear. I did not smile. I only sat there, my hands trembling, my heart pounding with something I couldn't yet name. Vindication. Fear. Perhaps both. What I knew was this. The applause no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. The sound of my name still echoed in the air when the room began to stir. Whispers darted like moths from one table to another. People leaned into their neighbors, their eyes swinging toward me in unison. Moments earlier, I had been the woman no one wanted at the table, the shadow in the corner, the punchline to an unkind joke. Now, the spotlight burned hotter, brighter, as if the chandeliers themselves had turned to watch. I could feel the weight of those stares pressing against my skin, some curious, some envious, some sharp enough to wound. My pulse raced, the blood in my ears louder than the string quartet that had begun to play again, futilely trying to smooth the edges of the disruption. And then came Ethan's voice. It wasn't the confident tone he had used while greeting guests earlier. It cracked, unsteady, carrying across the room like a boy who had lost his footing. No, that can't be true. His words snagged on themselves, each syllable betraying disbelief, fear, and something else too, betrayal. He turned toward the lawyer, his hands half lifted in protest, as though he could physically push the declaration back into silence. The crowd hushed again, waiting, hungry for the next unraveling. Brianna's fingers clutched his arm tightly, her knuckles white against the fabric of his tuxedo, her eyes darting between him and me with a panic she couldn't disguise. Thomas Caldwell, the lawyer, remained steady. He cleared his throat softly, not to stall, but to remind the room of his authority. There is more, he said, his voice level. He tapped the document with his forefinger. Mr. Harper's instructions were explicit. In addition to the lake house and retirement account, he wished it to be known that a significant portion of today's celebration was funded not by the groom or his bride, but by, he paused deliberately, though not for drama, his former wife. The silence that followed was a silence that cut deeper than laughter ever could. It stretched long enough for every person in the room to let the truth sink in. I saw heads turn, brows knit, and the slow widening of eyes. Me. The woman they had mocked, pitied, ignored. The woman Brianna had called an embarrassment. It was my money scraped together from years of saving that had paid for the crystal glasses they toasted with, for the band that played their love songs, for the roses lining the aisle. The realization slithered through the guests, soft gasps escaping lips that moments earlier had curled into cruel smiles. I sat perfectly still, my fingers digging into the stem of the champagne flute, not out of pride, but out of the strange, dizzying ache of vindication. For the first time that evening, no one dared to laugh, and as I looked at my son, his face drained of color, his lips trembling, his gaze finally colliding with mine, I thought of the irony. The woman branded as the shame of the family was the very one who had carried the weight of this night. Brianna's face drained of color so quickly it seemed her rouge had been wiped away by an invisible hand. Her lips trembled as though she had a retort forming, but none came. Even her gown, stiff with satin and lace, a fortress of fabric designed to project perfection, seemed to betray her, the bodice quivering faintly as she struggled for breath. For the first time that night, she did not look like a bride. She looked like a woman cornered. The lawyer did not falter. His hands, steady and deliberate, lifted a single sheet of paper from the folder. He held it up for the room to see, not waving it like a weapon, but presenting it like evidence. This, he said evenly, is the sponsorship agreement that funded tonight's celebration. His eyes swept across the crowd, letting them feel the gravity of each word. And here is the signature that made it possible. My heart lurched as I saw my name printed at the bottom. My handwriting curved awkwardly, the ink darker in places where my pen had pressed too hard. Proof undeniable and unflinching that I had been the one to hold this night together long before anyone raised a glass. I heard gasps ripple across the tables. Some guests leaned forward, squinting at the paper as if their eyes could close the distance between them and the truth. Others turned toward me, their expressions shifting, shame where there had been scorn, curiosity where there had been disdain. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again, like a man trying to breathe underwater. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between himself and Brianna, but he didn't know whom to steady, his bride or himself. Brianna finally found her voice, thin and brittle. That can't be right," she whispered, though her words did not carry beyond her table. But the lawyer answered her silence with firmness. "The documents are notarized. The funds transferred from her account. There is no mistake." The room seemed to tilt, and in that dizzying shift I understood what I hadn't before. David had wanted me here. My ex-husband, the man who had orchestrated so many of my losses, had also planted the seed for this moment. He had known that the truth would find me tonight, that I could no longer be dismissed as a burden. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was his final attempt at redemption. But suddenly I saw his insistence that I attend not as cruelty, but as preparation. The humiliation I had carried all evening, the laughter, the whispers, the stares, it all coalesced into a revelation that glowed, painful and bright. Justice had walked in wearing the clothes of embarrassment, and I had been too blinded to recognize it. Sometimes, I realized, justice doesn't arrive in the courtroom or in the quiet signing of papers. Sometimes it comes in the very moment when you feel most broken, cracking open the night and forcing the truth into the light. It began so quietly I thought I had imagined it. One pair of hands clapping, hesitant and uncertain, like the faint beat of a heart after a long silence. The sound drew a few heads, curious but cautious. For a moment, no one followed. The air still smelled of judgment, thick with the remnants of laughter that had mocked me only minutes before. Then another guest joined in. The rhythm grew steadier, louder, echoing against the vaulted ceiling. The applause crept across the tables as though it were contagious, passing from one pair of hands to another, until it became impossible to ignore. The sound gathered strength, blooming into a wave that rolled through the room. I sat still, my breath caught in my throat, unsure if I was witnessing approval or spectacle. But as the clapping swelled, I realized what it meant. They weren't applauding the vows or the flowers or the carefully staged perfection. They were applauding the truth, raw and undeniable, finally laid bare. The irony stung. Hours earlier, my very presence had been met with whispers and sideways glances, with Brianna's cold words and Ethan's silence. Yet here I was, at the center of an ovation. It felt less like triumph and more like a strange kind of justice, one that tasted bittersweet. The applause grew so loud it seemed to smother the remnants of laughter, burying it beneath a sound that was fuller, heavier, impossible to dismiss. I felt it vibrating through the soles of my old shoes, through the stem of the champagne glass still in my hand. For the first time all evening, the noise belonged to me. I turned my gaze toward Ethan, hoping, against reason, for something. A smile, a nod, any small acknowledgement that he understood what this meant, what it cost me to stand here stripped bare. Instead, he lowered his head. His eyes fixed on the tablecloth, his hands knotted together, his entire body folding inward, as though he could will himself invisible. He could not look at me. My son, whose life I had built and protected in ways he never knew, could not face the truth that the room had so readily embraced. The shame on his face was not mine, but his, and yet it pressed down on me as if I were carrying it, too. The applause began to taper, fading into murmurs, into glasses being lifted again, into the rhythm of a wedding that tried desperately to reassert itself. But the air was different now. The laughter that had once made me small had been drowned out by a sound I never expected to hear in my defense. In that moment, I understood something simple but profound. Truth has the power to shift a room, to turn scorn into recognition, to silence even the cruelest voices. It may not heal every wound, but it changes the air we breathe. And sometimes that is enough. I saw her coming before I heard her. Brianna moved across the polished floor in hesitant steps, her gown dragging slightly as though its weight had finally caught up with her. The glittering veil no longer made her look untouchable. It only framed the exhaustion etched into her face. When she reached me, her eyes shimmered, damp with tears that threatened to spill but did not yet fall. For a moment, she didn't speak. She only stood there, clutching the fabric at her waist as if she needed something solid to hold on to. Her breath shook as she finally whispered, "Mother." The word sounded foreign on her tongue, as though it had been buried for years and she had just dug it up. Then her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The words hung between us, fragile, unsteady, searching for a place to land. I felt the room watching again, though more discreetly this time. Eyes darting from their plates to us and back again. They wanted a performance, reconciliation to cap off the drama, a neat ending to tuck into their memories. I did not give it to them. I kept my body still, my lips pressed together. My hands clutched the stem of the empty champagne glass, holding it steady against the tremor of my heart. Silence stretched long and heavy, louder than any reply I might have given. Brianna's gaze flickered in desperation. Her painted lashes clumped together with moisture, her lips quivered. For a second, I saw the girl she might have been before pride and entitlement hardened her edges. The girl who might have once wanted a mother-in-law, not a rival. That glimpse softened something in me, but it did not erase the hours of humiliation carved fresh into my skin. "Please," she tried again, her voice small. I was wrong. I inhaled, the air sharp in my lungs. My body longed to release the ache, to fill the silence with forgiveness. To step into the role women like me had been taught to play: peacemaker, healer, the one who bends so others can stand tall. But I could not do it. Not tonight. I looked at her, my eyes steady even as my chest ached, and I let the silence remain. The space between us grew heavier, clearer, as if my stillness itself was the answer she feared. Her tears finally fell, slipping down the flawless mask of her makeup, streaking her perfection into something real. The guests had turned away by then, choosing not to watch what they couldn't understand. I was grateful for their retreat. This moment was not for them. It was for me. Forgiveness, I realized, is not something you can summon on command, not even for the sake of appearances. It comes in its own time, or not at all. Tonight, with the echoes of their laughter still clinging to me, it felt impossibly far away. And so I stood there, silent, while Brianna's apology dissolved into the noise of the hall. Sometimes forgiveness must wait. The music picked up again, violins straining to cover the silence that had fallen like dust across the tables. People lifted their forks, forced smiles, and resumed their meals as though nothing had fractured the night. But the laughter was gone. The sparkle in the air had dulled, leaving behind something brittle and uneasy. Each clink of silverware sounded too sharp, every whisper too thin to pass for joy. I sat at the end of the long table, my plate untouched. The roasted chicken cooled, the butter on the rolls hardened. My stomach had no space for food, it was filled with the heaviness of everything unsaid. Around me, the conversation stumbled. Guests spoke of work, of vacations, of dresses, but their voices tripped over themselves, faltering under the weight of what they all now knew. Then, slowly, I noticed it. One guest excused himself, rising with a muttered apology, his chair scraping against the floor. A couple followed not long after, their smiles stretched too tight, their eyes darting toward the door. One by one, like a string unraveling, people began to leave early. Not in waves, but in awkward drips, each departure punctuating the strangeness of the evening. Ethan watched them, his jaw rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. Brianna sat stiffly beside him, her face still pale, the remnants of tears staining the edges of her makeup. Neither of them spoke to me. Neither of them spoke much at all. Their silence became another guest at the table, loud and impossible to ignore. And then, amidst the shuffling chairs and the strained music, the lawyer appeared again. He moved without hurry, his dark suit cutting clean lines against the chaos of the hall. When he reached me, he didn't clear his throat or make a speech. He simply slid a small envelope across the white linen tablecloth. I looked down at it, unassuming and light, as though it held nothing more than air. But I knew better. The weight of paper can be heavier than stone, depending on the words it carries. My fingers hesitated before resting on the edge of the envelope, its flap sealed tight. I wanted to ask him why. Why now? Why here? Why me? But he gave me only a nod, respectful and restrained, before stepping back into the shadows. The envelope remained, its presence louder than the music, sharper than the whispers. The hall had begun the night as a wedding, a celebration of vows and beginnings. But as I sat there, the envelope burning against my palm, I saw it for what it had become: a courtroom without benches, a trial without robes. Every look cast in my direction was a judgment, every silence a verdict. And as the night stretched on, one truth became clear to me. This was no longer a feast, it was an inquest. The wedding had transformed into something colder, harsher. Tonight, beneath the chandeliers and the floral arrangements, we were all witnesses. When the guests began filing out of the hall in uneven clusters, I finally slipped the envelope open. My fingers trembled, not from fear, not entirely, but from the exhaustion of carrying too many emotions in one night. The flap tore unevenly. Inside, on heavy ivory paper, lay a single key. It wasn't new. The brass was tarnished in spots, scratched at the edges, worn from years of turning in a lock. Yet when I turned it over in my palm, recognition jolted through me. I knew this shape. I knew the weight of it even after all this time. The key to the lake house. The edges dug lightly into my skin as I closed my fist around it. I could almost smell the pine trees again, almost hear the creak of the wooden dock at dusk, when Ethan was a boy and refused to come out of the water until the sky turned violet. Memories unspooled so fast I felt dizzy. The lawyer's words still echoed. The lake house property, left to her. It was impossible to reconcile the paper in my lap with the years I had spent grieving that house, as though it were a lost relative. I remembered the day I had signed it away. My hand had shaken then too, but for different reasons. David had stood across the table from me in his pressed shirt, his lawyer at his side, the divorce papers stretched across the wood like a battlefield. "It's just a house," he had said, his voice clipped, impatient. "Let it go. We'll make this easier if you just let it go." I had let it go because I thought I had no choice. I let him win that battle, believing the war had already taken too much from me. My signature bled into the lines of the document, and I left the courthouse without looking back. But the truth was, I never stopped looking back. I carried the house in my dreams, in the quiet ache when summer came, and I no longer had a place by the lake to escape to. And now, the key rested in my palm again, not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as proof. Proof that the past can be rewritten, that paper does not always tell the final story. I held it tighter, closing my eyes. I saw Ethan at 7, dripping wet from the lake, standing on the dock with his teeth chattering, begging for 5 more minutes. I saw myself rocking in the porch chair with a book I never really read because I couldn't stop watching him. I saw David, too, standing at the edge of the water, tossing a stone farther than Ethan could ever hope to throw, his laughter filling the evening. For a moment, the memory was warm, almost tender, until it turned. Until I remembered how easily David could take something away, how he had taken me apart piece by piece, until even my name seemed disposable. But not this time. I opened my eyes to the ballroom again, the chandeliers still glowing, the tables littered with empty glasses and half-eaten cake. Ethan sat stiffly beside Brianna, their faces masks of composure that fooled no one. They hadn't moved since the lawyer had spoken. I wondered if they had noticed the envelope, if they knew what was inside. The lawyer had slipped back into the crowd, his duty done, leaving me alone with the truth. I placed the key on the table, the metal gleaming under the dimmed lights, and for the first time in years, I felt my hand steady. It wasn't just a key. It was a correction. Because this time, my name was etched on the paper. Not his, not theirs. I traced the ridges of the key with my thumb, letting its imperfections remind me of its history. The thought came suddenly, fierce and certain history is not always permanent. It can be rewritten if someone has the courage to fight for it, or if proof lies waiting in a drawer until the right moment to be revealed. I thought of Brianna's voice earlier, amplified by accident. This mother-in-law is such an embarrassment. I thought of Ethan's silence, of the way he had turned from me as though I were invisible. And then I thought of this moment, the small, solid weight of the key in my hand, and I realized I was no longer invisible. I had been written back into the story. A few guests still lingered, pretending to finish their coffee while sneaking glances at me. Their eyes no longer carried the sharp sting of mockery. Instead, they looked at me with something that resembled unease, perhaps respect, perhaps guilt. I didn't need to parse it. Their opinions no longer bound me the way they once had. I slipped the key into my purse, feeling its edges press against the lining like a heartbeat. This night had been a trial, but it had also been a revelation. The laughter, the humiliation, the silence. They had carved something new inside me. When I stood to leave, I walked past Ethan without hesitation. He lifted his eyes for a moment, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. I didn't wait for them. I had carried the burden of his silence long enough. The lake house waited for me now, not as a relic of what was lost, but as a promise of what could still be mine. And as I pushed open the doors of the ballroom, the night air rushed in, cool, crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me shift, not in fear, but in possibility. Because history, I realized, can be rewritten. And sometimes all it takes is a single key. I had just slipped the key into my purse when I felt a presence in front of me. I looked up, and there he was, Ethan. My son. His shadow stretched long across the marble floor, cutting through the golden light of the chandeliers. He didn't speak at first. He only stood there, shifting his weight as if every nerve in his body had betrayed him by bringing him to me. "Mom," he finally said, his voice rougher than I remembered, as if it had been scraped raw by shame. The word landed between us like something fragile, something we hadn't said to each other, in years without resentment hidden beneath it. The room seemed to quiet around us. The last guests lingered, their laughter dulled, their attention drawn by curiosity they tried to disguise. Brianna hovered a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes rimmed with the red of dried tears. For once, she had nothing to say. Ethan's hands twitched at his sides. Then he lifted his chin, his eyes finding mine at last. "Mom," he said again, softer now. "Please give me another chance." The words cracked something open inside me. My throat tightened. All the years of silence, of watching him slip further from me, of listening to Brianna's dismissive tone and pretending not to notice when he chose her voice over mine. Those years pressed against me now, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to take him in my arms, to pretend none of it had happened, to fold him back into the child I had once rocked to sleep. I wanted, for just a breath, to give us both the comfort of forgetting. But I couldn't forget. I stared at him, searching his face for the boy I remembered, the boy who had splashed water onto the dock and shouted with delight, the boy who had cried when his knees were scraped and reached for me without hesitation. But the man before me was different. His shoulders were broad, his jaw strong, his eyes shadowed by choices I had no part in. He was mine, yes, but he was also someone else's now. Behind him, Brianna shifted, her dress rustling faintly like dry leaves. Our eyes met, and in that glance, I saw everything: her fear, her guilt, her desperate hope that I would grant him the absolution she could not. And it struck me. This wasn't only his plea. It was hers too, silent but loud in the way her body leaned forward, waiting for me to erase the distance. I looked back at Ethan. His lips trembled. "I know I let you down," he said, voice breaking. "I should have defended you. I should have seen. But I didn't. And now I'm asking. Please, don't shut me out forever." My hand brushed the edge of my purse where the key rested. Its weight steadied me. Once I had given everything away: the house, the years, even the pieces of myself I thought I could live without. And look where it had left me. Sitting in a ballroom as a stranger to my own son. Forgiveness is not a switch you can flip. It is not a gift given on command, not even when blood demands it. Forgiveness requires truth, and Ethan's truth had come too late. I inhaled slowly, the air sharp as glass. My heart urged me toward him, but my spine kept me upright. "Ethan," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Love doesn't vanish, not even when it's been bruised. But love alone can't fix what's broken." His eyes widened, desperate, pleading. He reached out, his hand hovering between us. I could have taken it. I could have closed the distance with one gesture, one word. But instead, I let the silence answer. And then I turned, not away from him entirely, but enough that my gaze slid past him to Brianna. She held my eyes for a heartbeat, then dropped them, her chest rising sharply as though she'd been struck. The choice was not about punishing them. It was about protecting myself. I had lived too long giving chances to those who mistook them for guarantees. Tonight, I chose not to play the part of the woman who could always be leaned on, always be forgiven, no matter the cost. When I looked back, Ethan's hand had fallen to his side. His shoulders slumped. He lowered his head, staring at the floor as though he might find an answer written in the marble. The silence stretched, painful and raw, until finally he stepped back. The music swelled again, filling the space he left behind. Guests began to murmur, returning to their small talk as though nothing monumental had just occurred. But for me, everything had shifted. The air itself felt different, heavier and lighter all at once. I pressed my hand to my purse, feeling the key beneath the fabric, solid and real. It reminded me that while motherhood binds you, it does not demand self-destruction. A mother's love can survive betrayal, but it doesn't have to swallow it whole. As Ethan returned to Brianna's side, I closed my eyes briefly, letting the ache wash through me. Love still lived inside me, fierce and unyielding. But even love, I realized, cannot save everything. Sometimes the bravest choice a mother can make is to love from a distance. The ballroom doors swung shut behind me with a muted thud, sealing in the glitter and the murmurs and the brittle laughter. The sound of the string quartet still drifted through the crack, muffled now, like a dream fading as morning light presses through the blinds. I stepped into the quiet hallway, the marble floor cool beneath my worn heels, my purse heavy against my hip. Inside it, the key rested, a small unassuming piece of metal that seemed to burn with significance. I paused at the edge of the corridor, inhaling deeply. The air out here was different. Cleaner, untainted by perfume and champagne, free from the heavy scent of roses that had lined every corner of the reception hall. For the first time all evening, I felt I could breathe. The key pressed against the lining of my purse each time I shifted. I slipped my hand inside, curling my fingers around it. Its ridges bit into my palm, grounding me in a way nothing else had tonight. It was more than a key. It was a reminder that sometimes life circles back, returning what was lost, reshaping what was broken. Behind me, the music swelled again. The bridal party must have reassembled, the speeches resuming. The rituals moving forward as though nothing had cracked the facade. I could picture them, Brianna smiling through her embarrassment, Ethan stiff at her side. The guests trying to stitch the night back together with polite conversation and clinking glasses. And yet, something had shifted. No matter how tightly they clung to appearances, they would never erase the moment my name had rung through that microphone, the moment truth tore through the room like a sudden gust. That memory would remain, lodged in their minds long after the champagne had gone flat and the flowers had wilted. I walked slowly toward the exit, my footsteps echoing faintly. Every step seemed to peel me further from the night, from the bitterness, from the humiliation that had nearly consumed me. And yet I carried it all with me, too, tucked into the same purse that now held the key. The contradiction pressed against me, the pain of being mocked and the relief of being vindicated, both stitched into the same fabric of memory. When I pushed open the glass doors at the end of the corridor, the night air rushed in, cool, damp with the scent of pine and water from the lake just miles away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even before I set foot inside the house again, the lake was already calling me back. I stepped outside, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The parking lot shimmered faintly under the street lamps, a scattering of cars waiting like patient sentinels. My reflection caught briefly in the glass of a darkened window, and for once I didn't look away. I saw myself as I was. Older, yes, with lines carved by years of disappointment, but still standing, still moving forward. The music from the ballroom reached me even here, faint but insistent. It followed me like an echo I could not outrun. And as I paused, key clenched in my hand, I realized that was how forgiveness felt. Something that trailed after you. Never fully gone, never fully present. I thought of Ethan. His face bowed under shame, his words trembling. "Mom, give me another chance." My heart ached at the memory, aching in a way only a mother's heart can ache. Love does not dissolve, no matter how much it is bruised. But love does not erase betrayal either. Would I forgive him? I didn't know. Tonight, the answer lay suspended between us, as uncertain as the moonlight on the pavement. Forgiveness, I understood, is not a single choice. It is a road, winding and uneven, one you must walk step by step, and I hadn't yet taken the first. I looked down at the key again, its brass catching the faint glow of the streetlight. It was more than a house it unlocked. It was possibility, a place that was mine, undeniably mine, written in ink and law. A place where I could decide, on my own terms, what came next. The night pressed around me, quiet now except for the faint hum of music that grew weaker with distance. The wedding would continue without me, the photos posed, the cake cut, the dance floor filled. They could try to seal over the cracks, to paint the night as seamless. But I knew the truth, and so did they. A wedding lasts a day, but truth stays. That thought pulsed inside me as I walked toward my car. The key swung lightly from my fingers now, no longer a burden but a promise. My steps quickened, the night air bracing against my cheeks. I didn't know yet what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I would stand in that lake house and let forgiveness slowly find me, or if I would build walls high enough to keep it out forever. But I knew this much tonight. I had reclaimed more than a property. I had reclaimed myself. The music faded completely as I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. And though the night stretched long, I felt, for the first time in years, that it was mine to navigate. The wedding was over for me. But the truth, that would stay. The story of that night does not end at the ballroom doors. It lingers, the way a perfume clings to fabric long after its owner has left the room, the way laughter, cruel or kind, echoes in memory long after silence has settled. 16 chapters, each one written into my skin. Each one bearing witness to the strange truth that weddings are not only about beginnings. Sometimes they are also about reckonings. I think back to the first moment, when I stepped into the hall in a dress I had kept far too long. How small I felt, how quickly the whispers slithered around me, wrapping me in a cloak of shame I didn't ask to wear. The evening was a series of humiliations. My daughter-in-law's disdain, my son's silence, the microphone's betrayal that turned a whisper into a roar. Each moment could have broken me. Perhaps once it would have. But instead, each wound sharpened me. Each humiliation prepared me for what was coming: the voice of a lawyer, the reading of a will, the sound of my name spoken clearly for all to hear. For years, I had been erased from their story, a footnote in Ethan's life. That night my name was written back in ink, not as charity, not as pity, as fact. The lake house returned to me. The retirement account secured my future. Even the very celebration that had mocked me, the flowers, the champagne, the music, was revealed to have been built, in part, by my own sacrifice. That irony was not lost on me. They called me an embarrassment. But embarrassment had been their disguise, not mine. Ethan's plea still pierces me. Mom, give me another chance. The boy I raised stood before me, a man I barely recognized, asking for forgiveness that I could not summon in the moment. Do I regret my silence? Sometimes. A mother's heart is complicated, stitched with contradictions. We want to protect even when we have been betrayed. We want to heal, even when the wound is still bleeding. But I also know that silence was the only honest answer I could give him then. Forgiveness is not a gift handed out to soothe another's guilt. It is a choice, and I am still deciding. What I know is this: motherhood does not end when a son turns away. Love does not vanish when silence grows wide. It lingers, quieter, less demanding, but no less real. Ethan will always be mine in some irrevocable way. But being his mother does not mean losing myself. That lesson has been carved too deeply into me to be forgotten. The key rests on my nightstand now, its metal glinting in the light of dawn. It is more than property, more than bricks and wood and a view of the lake. It is proof that history bends sometimes, if you hold on long enough. Years ago I signed the house away with shaking hands, believing I was powerless. Now the house returns to me, carrying not just my memories but also my name etched firmly on the deed. Proof that what was stolen can be restored. Proof that I am not as easily erased as they once thought. I don't know yet if Ethan will come to me at the lake house. I don't know if Brianna's apology will ever grow roots deeper than shame. Perhaps time will soften what pride has hardened. Or perhaps the distance will remain, a necessary wall between us. Either way, I no longer feel bound to chase their acceptance. That is what changed that night. Not just the will, not just the house, not even the applause that drowned out the laughter. What changed was me. For so long I believed my worth was measured by how others saw me, by David's approval, Ethan's attention, Brianna's respect. But worth is not given. It is claimed. That night, in humiliation and in revelation, I claimed mine back. A wedding lasts a day. Flowers wilt, music fades, cake grows stale. But truth lasts. The truth that I was more than their whispers. The truth that I carried more weight for them than they ever admitted. The truth that justice sometimes comes wrapped not in triumph, but in shame, and still it comes. So I leave the story open, the way life leaves itself open. Maybe forgiveness will find me. Maybe Ethan will learn what love looks like when it is no longer guaranteed. Maybe Brianna will one day understand that cruelty corrodes the hand that holds it. Or maybe not. The beauty of truth is that it does not depend on what comes next. It simply is. And for me, that is enough. The night of my son's wedding taught me that beginnings do not always happen where we expect. Sometimes they come at the edge of endings, in the quiet after music, in the glint of a key, in the certainty that you have survived what should have destroyed you. I walked into that ballroom in embarrassment. I walked out with proof of who I truly was. And though the wedding is over, though the music no longer reaches me, the truth remains. It will remain tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after, waiting for me at the lake house, waiting in the reflection of the water where my son once played, waiting in the lines of my own face that I have finally learned not to hide. Because stories don't end when the lights dim. They live on, in memory, in whispers, in the choices we carry. And this story, the one they thought they could write without me, belongs to me now. Forever. Sometimes a story doesn't end when the last page is turned, or when the last words are spoken. It lingers, inside your chest, in the way you breathe, in the way you think about your own family when the lights are off. This mother's journey, through humiliation, betrayal, and an unexpected justice, reminds us that truth has its own strange timing. It may come too late to heal everything, but never too late to change everything. Maybe you're wondering if she'll forgive her son. Maybe you're asking yourself what you would do, whether love is enough, or whether self-respect must finally take its place. Those questions aren't answered here, and perhaps they never will be. That's what makes the story real. Because life rarely ties its endings with neat ribbons. If this story moved you, if you felt her ache, her strength, or her choice resonate somewhere in your own life, I ask you to carry it forward. Share it, speak about it, let it spark the conversations we're sometimes too afraid to have. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories like this, stories of family, betrayal, resilience, and quiet justice, please remember to like this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Telling Story with Me. Because stories only truly live when they're told, and when they're heard. And tonight, you've heard hers.